So today we're going to be talking about how to ask for a divorce without ending up in court. Hi, I'm Ruthenberg-Marshall, founder of Porchlight. Telling your spouse that you want a divorce is probably one of the more awkward conversations that you're going to have during your marriage. And it's important to get it right. The tone of this first conversation can set the tone for the rest of your divorce. There are 5 tips that we recommend you implement to make sure that this initial divorce conversation goes smoothly. Tip number 1, set your goal for the conversation. What do you want to accomplish out of this conversation? You just need to let your spouse know that you want a divorce so they understand what you're thinking and what's going on and what direction the relationship is heading in. You don't want to be angry or accusatory. The goal is not to win this conversation or make your spouse feel terrible about whatever they did that's so awful that has led to this divorce. That's not going to be a productive conversation for anyone, and it's going to probably end in lots of yelling and tears and misery. So just let them know what's going on and keep the conversation future focused. You're ready to move forward, and for you to do that, you need to get a divorce. Tip number 2, choose a comfortable place and time. You want to have this conversation in a good setting that's conducive to the seriousness and importance of this conversation. If you have children, you probably want to make sure that the children are out of the house when you do it. And along those lines, you probably want to make sure that you're in your house, not in line at the grocery store or at a restaurant waiting for your dinner to be served. You want that privacy for both of you during this conversation. You also want to make sure that you both have space to walk away from this conversation. This is going to be a lot for both of you to process, and it could be particularly difficult for your spouse to process if they didn't expect or see this coming. So you want to make sure that you can both leave the conversation if it gets too intense. You also want to make sure that you're doing it at a decent time. Now, I don't know if there's an optimal time to ask your spouse for a divorce, but there are definitely worse times than others. So, for example, if your spouse has just lost someone in their family or they're going through a rough patch at work, those are not going to be the best times. And if you've already been in your marriage for 5, 10, 15 years, you can probably wait another month or 2 to make sure that your spouse is in a place where they're going to be receptive to hearing what you have to say. Tip number 3, balance firmness with kindness. A divorce conversation is a breakup, and a breakup is not a negotiation. This is not an opportunity for your spouse to win you back or persuade you to give your marriage one more shot. If you're at a point where you think you might want to give your marriage one more shot, this is probably not the conversation that you want to be having. That's a different conversation to have with your spouse about how you can work on and improve your marriage. But if you're at the point where you've decided that you want to get divorced, that is your decision to make, and you shouldn't let your spouse talk you out of it. You've made this huge, significant decision for a reason, because you realize you're not happy with the way your life is now, and you think you'll be happier in the future once you're apart from your spouse. I also recommend that you tell your spouse that you want an amicable divorce. You're letting your spouse know that you don't want this to be a knockdown, drag-out, nasty court battle, that you respect them and you want the process to be as amicable as possible, even though it's going to be a difficult one. This can reassure your spouse a lot that even though this is going to be a difficult experience for both of you, you're going to go about it in the best, healthiest way possible. Tip number 4, give your spouse time to process. A divorce is huge news. And even if you've been thinking about a divorce for months or maybe even years, it's possible the thought never crossed your spouse's mind. Or even if they did, they just thought it wasn't someplace that their relationship would ever end up. So they're going to need time to process this heavy decision and to come to terms with the reality of what the future looks like going forward with the divorce process instead of staying married. Your spouse may be hurt and react angrily initially. That doesn't mean that that's how the entire process is going to go. They could just be having difficulty absorbing this information, and their initial reaction is that they're feeling vulnerable and hurt, and they express it through anger. While you can respond to that, try and keep your responses neutral and toned down. Don't escalate the anger. Just let them know that you understand that they're hurt and that you hope once they've had some time to process this information, you can talk about moving forward with the case in a peaceful manner. Your spouse may have questions for you about how you came to this decision or about how far along the process is, such as if you've talked to an attorney already before. Again, this goes back to what we talked about in tip number 1 about not being angry or accusatory in the conversation. You can certainly answer their questions so that they're not feeling lost and completely unmoored and they understand why you made this decision, but blaming them isn't going to be helpful to the conversation. Tip number 5 is to avoid getting too far ahead of yourselves. This is just the first conversation, and there will be a lot more conversations in this process. This is not the time to negotiate terms for your divorce. Even if you've been thinking about this for a while, in this emotional moment, you are probably not thinking as clearly as you possibly could. You don't need to resolve what the custody schedule is going to be, who's going to keep the house, how you're going to divide the retirement accounts. All those terms can wait till later. So if your spouse tries to get into them, just assure them that you want to find a fair and amicable resolution and you want to reach an agreement and keep the case out of court, but that you're not prepared to have that conversation yet. What your spouse is probably looking for, more so than the specific details of what exactly is going to happen in the divorce agreement, is that you don't want to make this a huge, nasty process. They're looking for assurance that the process is going to go smoothly, because even though they're ending their marriage and they're upset, they can at least do it in a way that is respectful of both parties involved. After you've asked your spouse for a divorce, you'll want to keep the process moving forward. So if you haven't already talked to an attorney, you'll want to make sure to schedule an appointment to talk about what the divorce process entails, and you'll want to look for an attorney who will help you keep the case amicable. Not all attorneys take that approach. Some of them focus on high conflict litigation, and they might not be the attorney who's the best fit for you. Now, if you want a high conflict case, maybe they are, but I'm guessing you wouldn't have gotten this far in the video if that's what you're looking for. So ask attorneys questions about what they do to keep cases amicable and about what their typical case process looks like, so you know what to expect when you're working with them. You'll also want to think about what other professionals you may need to get involved in the process. For example, if one of you is going to refinance the home, you may need to talk to a mortgage broker. If you are unsure about how to co-parent together going forward, you may want to schedule some sessions with you and your spouse for a co-parenting counselor. There are a lot of different professionals and resources out there, and your attorney can help you narrow down which professionals are going to be the most beneficial to you and your case. You'll also want to talk to your spouse about when and how to share the news. Again, they're going to need some time to process, so you might not need to set this timeline in that first initial conversation. But after they've had some time to think about and absorb the information, check back in with them and make sure that you get on the same page to tell family and friends, and especially if you have children, as to when and how to tell your children, because that's a conversation that you want to have together. I hope that your conversation telling your spouse that you want a divorce goes smoothly and that you find some of these tips useful in guiding that conversation. If you're looking for an attorney who can help keep your case low conflict and out of court, Porchlight focuses on resolving all our cases as amicably as possible. We're here to help when you're ready.